Good afternoon, everyone. It's a beautiful Friday. It is about 60 degrees. It's really nice outside in State College in Pennsylvania. To provide this content to those who are not able to make today, we are recording this lecture. By joining today's lecture, your consent to be recorded. Well, I want to congratulate everybody. Today is November 20th. That's the date that we decide to go to all remote. So far, so good. We thrive, we survive, whatever you want to call. We are here and we are ready to move on to remote. I know next week is Thanksgiving. So I hope that you don't bring any COVID with you so that you have a wonderful time with your family next week. So happy Thanksgiving. Today, we have our third graphic design lecture by Victoria Gerson. And we are excited to hold this kind of event. I know we have two more to come, but I have to welcome Victoria Gerson today. As a moderators, we have Ryan Russell, Associate Professor of Graphic Design. Ryan, it's all yours now.
Hey, thank you, Phil, and everyone. It's so awesome to see you. I'm looking forward to the day where we can all be together again in purpose or in person. I am so excited today to introduce Victoria Gerson. I want to start with a short bio before I hand it over. Victoria Gerson is a Brazilian-American graphic designer from Miami, Florida. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts in Graphic Design from the University of Florida and recently graduated from the Master of Graphic Design program at North Carolina State University. Her graduate work addresses emerging technologies' role in issues like climate change and education. She believes in the designer's ability and responsibility to have a socially conscious design practice, and that this consciousness can start in the classroom. Victoria is currently a scholar in residence at the University of Houston for the 2020-21 academic year, and she is teaching a class about design activism. So please join me in welcoming Victoria to Penn State. And Victoria, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for that introduction. Let me go ahead and share my screen with y'all. So yeah, thank you again. I want to say thank you to Phil for inviting me to come speak with you all. And funny enough, I actually should have been physically in Pennsylvania twice this year for this talk and for the AIJ conference that happened virtually last week. But I'm so excited to be speaking with y'all in this space regardless. And the main thing I want to talk about with you all today is what is the role of the designer, especially in today's social and political context. And I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about where my design journey began. So again, I'm a Brazilian American designer, born and raised in Miami, Florida, and being from these two different cultures, exploring identity has always played a role in my work. I pulled this piece out from the archives to show one of my earliest design pieces from high school, where I made a book using photos from my travels to Brazil after I hadn't been there for 5 years. And when I got to college, I continued to explore these themes in my work where I could. Some examples are this Mama's Homemade Delivery on the left, which was based on my mom's cooking and traditional Brazilian dishes. And for this, I actually handmade the wooden pieces in my sculpture class and bought all the food and cooked a whole meal to take the pictures. And on the right is a city branding project for which I branded the city of Vitória, where most of my family lives. And over time, I began to want to learn about identity, not only through myself, but through others as well. And one of the last things that I did while at UF was design a pair of magazines exploring gender and sexuality and nationality and ethnicity as they relate to being othered identities. And these ideas of exploring my own and other people's identities has had a large influence on my teaching style, which I will touch on more later. And another theme that comes up again and again is this theme of the environment. From plants to food to waste, I've always been interested in environmental communication. So I had done some research into the horticultural community, and this was an infographic and some design solutions that came out of this project. And I was also doing some research into the history of the plastic bag and waste. But when I was in undergrad, what I did outside of the classroom was just as important, informative as what happened inside of the classroom. I became involved with TEDxUF for 3 out of the 4 years that I was there. And for the first 2 years, I was the graphic designer and learned everything about the process of designing for a large event. And that included everything from designing the schedules and programs to working directly with printers, designing the merch, such as t-shirts, stickers, flyers, and social media graphics. And in my 3rd year, I had the opportunity to take on the role as creative director and teach everything I had learned during my time to the creative team. And these designs here were made by the designer on my team, Libby Inlow. And at the same time, I was also the president of the graphic design club at UF called Box Graphies. And I mentioned these 2 experiences because it was through these leadership positions that I realized how much I really enjoyed teaching, directing, managing projects, and fostering community. And these are the things that made me want to pursue graduate school in order to learn about what else was out there beyond traditional and visual design, and to be able to go into teaching. So one of the first projects I worked on when I entered grad school was creating a workshop based on the AIGA Designer of 2025 trends, written by Meredith Davis, who some of you may have heard from earlier this semester, as she also gave a lecture for this series. And Meredith is a professor emeritus at North Carolina State, so you could guess that much of our studies are influenced by her work. And there are 7 trends. My group was assigned trend number 4, which is core values matter. And this trend talks about how teachers must resist over-compartmentalizing design for good from other kinds of work, suggesting to students that commercial work is not for good, because all design should be accountable for producing positive social and environmental consequences, and students should be held to those high standards. So myself and 2 of my peers worked together to create a workshop where our classmates would create a code of ethics, or what we also call a design manifesto. And they worked collaboratively to write statements about what designers should do, shouldn't do, should recognize, and are responsible for. And once the statements were formulated within groups, each group read theirs to each other and in a sort of democratic fashion would edit each other's statements in order to all collectively agree on them. And in the end, everyone wrote their statement, signed the document, and we recorded a video where each person recited a statement from it, which is what is playing on that iPad and the photo on the right. And when we exhibited it, we also created a space where others could sign on to it as well. So while this was building off of the original First Things First manifesto and other versions of it that have come after, it was also done before the creation of this latest 2020 version that can actually be signed onto online as well. And at the same time, I was the teaching assistant for a sophomore level course called Design Context and Experience. And I was so obsessed with this idea of core values within the classroom and bringing social and cultural issues to the forefront that after the semester was done, I began to analyze the structure of the class and everything that had occurred throughout the semester. I identified the design phases within each project, the types of instruction given, like whether it was a lecture, demonstration, or critique, the core values that were being taught through each project, and most importantly, what I had seen as pain points throughout the class. And I was doing this in order to find these areas where lessons on core values and social issues could be added into the class as it already existed in order to alleviate those pain points. And I was realizing that there was something missing and that there's a way to add in these lessons on core values without having to change the actual foundation that the class is based on in order to provide our students with even more social and cultural understanding. And this is where I really began to believe that engaging students with social issues can and should begin in the classroom. So moving forward, there's a lot of work around virtual reality happening at NC State, and I started to take these VR development workshops, and I was pointed to a position on a project that was aiming to make virtual reality experiences to teach plant biology concepts. So that's when I began a graduate research assistantship on this project called VR Plants that I ended up working on for 2 years. And this project was funded by a grant from the American Society of Plant Biologists and was a collaboration between the Department of Plant and Microbial Biology and the university libraries. So I was in this really interesting position as a graphic designer who was funded by the plant biology department, working inside of a VR studio. And here's an example of where I really had to question, like, what is the role of the graphic designer on a project like this? You know, like, I know nothing about plant biology. I don't actually know how to create and code VR experiences. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. And for a large part of the 2 years, the main team consisted of just 3 people: myself, Colin Keenan, who's a trained plant biologist and now a library technician running the virtual reality studio, and Dr. Larry Bland, who is a professor in the Department of Microbial Biology. So not only was I learning about emerging technology, but I was also getting hands-on lessons on plant biology, like you can see in this picture. And the vision for this grant was largely based off of Colin's thesis work, which was to digitize the collections of the campus herbarium. And just to clarify, an herbarium is like a library of preserved plant specimens. So he converted specimens into digital representations with 3D scanning technology, and these were the jumping off points for all the work that was to come. Overall, my role throughout the life of this project was so varied. I was taking on traditional design responsibilities like designing the logo, flyers, custom Google Cardboard viewers, and signage for our workshops and demonstrations. And I even worked alongside a web developer for a short time to create our website. But I also took on roles as a project manager, design researcher, workshop facilitator, and technology assistant. While making educational games was one of our main goals for this project, accessibility was also another really important intention of ours. And one of the first things we did was put on workshops to teach educators about this technology and its possibilities so they could begin to imagine what ways they could utilize this in their classroom. We would begin with a general talk at the beginning about these technologies and their possibilities for use within education, and then have a session on coding. And last, a technology playground where they could play with the augmented reality Merge Cube, Oculus Rift headsets, among other things like the Vive and Oculus Go. And they could learn how to use an Artec 3D scanner, which was usually my station. We added a coder and a 3D modeler to our team who were with us for a large chunk of the time to assist in the development phases. So I'm going to show you a sample of what we were able to make and do in the next year or so with a 5-person team. And I just want to mention that there were definitely many other people who were involved and supported us along the way, who we are really grateful for. One of our first experiences is what we call Ramshorn. So Ramshorn is a web-based virtual reality game intended to be used as an activity to support a lesson on plant form and function relationships. The objective of the game is to try to throw a Ramshorn seed pod, which is that form on the bottom left, onto a nearby bison. And this is actually how these particular seeds get dispersed into the wild. This game plays like a carnival or arcade gallery game and is supported on desktop, mobile, tablet, with no download necessary. In fact, the code for this game is open source and is usually played on a smartphone with a Google Cardboard. Another project we worked on was a collaboration between us and 2 researchers who are working to rejuvenate a rare 16-acre longleaf pine ecosystem for use as a teaching space. And recording of forest spaces in the aftermath of controlled burns is often overlooked and, of course, is time sensitive. And these are some photos from when we did site visits directly after the burn. We ended up filming a series of 360 videos documenting the restoration process a couple of months post-burn. And I couldn't embed a 360 video here, but these are some stills from that, and the videos are available as a playlist on YouTube. These videos allow students to conduct walking tours of an ephemeral learning space with experts pointing out key features, and allows the researchers and professors to use this content over and over. One of our longer collaborations was with the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And there's a section within the museum called the Naturalist Center. And this space, which you can see on the picture on the right, is filled with really interesting animal, geological, and plant specimens. And their longstanding issue is that the aisles housing the botanical or plant collections are the least explored. And that's for a couple of reasons, mostly having to do with the fact that because plant specimens are much more fragile, they're usually protected behind clear containers, and unlike other specimens within the center, which afford visitors the ability to touch, feel, and engage in further exploration. So I mentioned what an herbarium is earlier, but this is what the information stored in an herbarium looks like. The specimens are pressed, dried, and annotated, and this is how a naturalist, which is just someone who studies plants or animals, gathers information about the specimen. So the museum has their own herbarium, but the specimens are filed in a cabinet that visitors don't actually get to see. And we realized, if you remember what I said earlier about the digitized collections, that we had 3D models of specimens that the museum had flat press specimens of. And so we created an index with to coordinate which of our 3D specimens overlapped with the museum specimens. And we did research on the workspaces of naturalists, both past and present. And these are some preliminary sketches from our first ideation phases. We were thinking about this experience where a visitor of the museum could sit down at a desk and be in a workspace that is similar to that of an actual naturalist workspace in order to interact with these various versions of the specimens and learn about them through several metadata experiences. And finally, these are some stills from inside the final experience, and I'll play a video recording as well that has a bit of an explanation of all the features.
The Naturalist Workshop is an exemplar virtual reality platform to interact with digitized collections in an intuitive and playful way. The Naturalist Workshop is a purpose-developed application for the Oculus Quest standalone virtual reality headset, for use by museum visitors on the floor of the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences under the supervision of a volunteer attendant. Within the application, museum visitors are seated at a virtual desk. Using their hand controllers and head-mounted display, they explore drawers containing botanical specimens and tools of the trade of a naturalist. While exploring, the participant can receive new information from any specimen by dropping it into a virtual examination tray. 360-degree photography and three-dimensionally scanned specimens are used to allow user-motivated, immersive experience of botanical metadata, such as specimen collection coordinates. To allow the exploration of this collection location metadata, a custom shader was built to display a 360-degree photograph that depicts the collection location of each specimen. The delivery device for these images is a transparent sphere that floats above the desk work area. Upon placing any specimen in the inspection tray, this orb will show a microcosm of the plant's growth location.
So while we were originally making the Naturalist Workshop in collaboration with the North Carolina Museum of Science, and with the intention of it being used as a carded experience that they could bring out for special events or when there's adequate museum staff to run the cart, it's not only usable in that context. So we made it available to download for free on sidequest.com so anyone can load it onto their headset devices. And we also wrote a paper on this work and submitted it to the iLearn conference, which is the Immersive Learning Research Network, and it was published in IEEE Proceedings. And IEEE is the world's largest technical professional organization that focuses on advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. Some other really awesome experiences that we got to do during our time was attend and demonstrate at several conferences. So last summer, we packed up all of our equipment and went to the American Society of Plant Biologists National Conference in San Jose, California. We showcased our work in the form of a pop-up VR demonstration space on the showcase floor, a presentation on the event's innovation stage, and a presentation in the education session. And we were actually showing all three of our experiences, so the ram's horn, longleaf pine restoration, and the naturalist workshop. And we got to user test and get feedback on the experiences with over 100 plant biologists of all ages from about 6 to 70. And there's something really exciting about putting people in VR for the first time and seeing their reactions. And the last thing I'll talk about with this project was a workshop that we created and ran at MOGFest in Durham, which is an annual multi-day music, art, and technology festival that bridges the divide between engineering and artistry. And the workshop was called Please Program the Flowers, Building a Digital Bouquet. In this workshop, each participant put together a bouquet out of real flowers, then 3D scanned the flowers, sculpted a vase in VR, and then our coder put these elements together for them. And at the end, they could put an image on the vase, and these are some of the results of that workshop that are all available to view and download on Google Poly. So I spent almost my whole time in graduate school working on this project, and needless to say, it was deeply influential in how I see and understand cross-disciplinary collaboration and the possibilities of emerging technologies. And I just want to touch on this point again, that I entered this project not knowing where a graphic designer fits into a development team, and learned that my role could encompass all of these things and more. And through this project and some other minor roles on other VR projects, I became interested in virtual reality as a tool that I foresee as being a mainstream means of communication in the future. And while I of course acknowledge the issues regarding accessibility and don't see VR as a solution for everything, I believe in its potential to be used more and more for education, information, and communication, not just entertainment. There was a workshop that I participated in with Stuart Candy, who is a professor at Carnegie Mellon, whose work focuses on the future and helping us imagine alternative futures. And during this workshop, we made experiential scenarios, which in Candy's words is a future brought to life, a tangible what if, and a way of thinking out loud, materially or performatively, or both. And it involves designing and staging interventions using role-playing, simulation, and objects that enable a different and deeper engagement and thought and discussion about one or more futures. During this workshop, my group and I designed a scenario where we're in the year 2084 in a future where there's no trash. So we made what we called the Museum of Yesterday that was having a special exhibition on the history of trash. And participants in this experience were given masks and gloves. Trash was put on display and labeled as it would be in a gallery setting. There was a lecture on the history of trash in the early 20th century, an interactive trash station where you learned how to separate recycling and trash, and a trash collector demonstration. And the way that day seemed to change people's perception of trash while we were inside of the experience, but also afterwards, especially since most of the trash was taken from inside of our own studio, was really impactful to me. And because of this thread of interest for environmental communication, along with my introduction to and involvement with emerging technologies like VR, I really felt like virtual reality is the ultimate experiential scenario. So for my master's final project, I decided that I wanted to focus on climate change, and I was really interested in perception and why it's so hard for us to understand and visualize climate change, and then to change our behaviors accordingly. So I was looking at the theory of psychological distance, which is all about the perceived distance between an individual and an object, event, or issue. And it's made up of 4 dimensions: social, temporal, spatial, and experiential. And according to construct level theory, a person's mental construct of an issue is represented and evaluated as either abstract or concrete, depending on their psychological distance to the issue, which in turn influences the set of behavioral responses available to respond to said issue. So my primary research question was, how can the design of virtual reality experiences decrease psychological distance to climate change in order to increase citizens' individual and collective efficacy? And my first study focused on the ways that information and narratives from traditional media channels are transformed and enhanced when brought into 3D spaces. And at the time, I was a teaching assistant for Dr. Derek Ham, and we found an opportunity for me to conduct a study with our students. I moderated a focus group with freshman design students to learn about their dispositions towards the media channels where they receive information about climate change. And they also engaged in an activity where they learned about sea level rise through 4 different media channels and analyzed them. This was also an opportunity for me to talk to the students about the issue and discuss the role of the designer in issues like this, which many of them hadn't considered previously. And using insights from these activities, I explored how to bring a digital article and 2D video into a 3D space. And in this video screenshot, the woman is literally asking you to imagine water pouring into the streets on a regular basis. Now, I currently live in Miami Beach, so that's very easy for me to imagine, AKA I'm not psychologically distant from it. And it's actually happened just 2 times just this last week or 2. But that's not the case for everyone. And so rather than asking someone to imagine a scenario, place, or event that is abstract or unfamiliar to them, bringing a user into a constructed 3D environment that can be actively engaged with can add to their ability to mentally construct the scenario. My second study focused on how 3D environments can be designed to facilitate interactions that decrease psychological distance to a specific climate change issue, in this case, sea level rise. And I worked with the same students to code 3D interactive environments that decrease one specific dimension of psychological distance. So I'll show just one, example for each dimension. This piece shows the effects of sea level rise on wildlife and their habitats. And the user follows turtles through 3 locations in North Carolina, witnessing the turtles being pushed out of their habitat. So as sea levels rise and the flooding moves further inland, so do the turtles. This piece displays hurricanes that broke storm surge records in Wilmington, North Carolina, and each wall represents the year a hurricane broke the record for highest storm surge levels in Wilmington. And as the user directs their gaze at each wall, the wall is activated and the water rises to represent the height of the storm surge. The time frame in which climate change is affecting us is emphasized, showing that while it took 62 years to beat the 1954 record, the record was then promptly beat 2 years later in 2018. This experience displays the consequences of sea level rise on the coastal town of Wilmington in the year 2050. The user moves through a series of rooms that represent effects on historical landmarks, residents, and tourists in the town. And in this, we see projections of what sea level rise looks like at several meters in a singular location. There are 3 locations, allowing the user to move through projected situations in each geographic location. And my third study focused on how tools can represent each dimension of psychological distance and interact as a system intended for use within a VR experience. I was looking at precedent VR or interactive work and mapping them by their degrees of both interactive and conceptual agency, and where interactive agency is the tools provided to the user and conceptual is the actual information that the user has access to. And for me, this meant designing a framework or a system that allows a user to be an active participant and have high levels of agency in the experience, rather than being in an experience that is predetermined for you, as many climate change related VR experiences are today. So in the proposed system, the spatial tool would allow access to the globe at various levels: global, national, state, city, neighborhood, and street view. And for temporal, the user can move through any point in time, past, present, or future. For social, the user chooses between events, of which there are several categories, like causes or effects, each with their own various subcategories. And for experiential, the tool is a projection feature that allows the user to input certain conditions in order to project effects and impacts on events. The proposed system in this investigation emphasizes the need to provide tools and resources that assist in fostering and facilitating awareness, participation, and interaction. So some things that I've been thinking about as I move forward from this work is, how can virtual reality be a space for real-time organizing and action towards an issue like climate change? Something I feel like I was getting towards but stopped just short of. And I believe there's a potential in VR for users to connect with and join other individuals, communities, and organizations that are working towards positive action against climate change. And through the experience of working with the students, I began to wonder if the act of creating and designing these types of experiences, so asking someone to be a creator and not just a consumer, is an equally or perhaps even more effective tool for decreasing psychological distance to an issue. But it all goes back to this idea of agency. And so the act of creating is a form of agency that could possibly be more powerful than interacting with something that's already been created. So shifting a bit, since graduating, I began a position as a scholar in residence at the University of Houston and have been given the unique opportunity to design a special topics class. So I've been building a class about design activism. And this class is based on the idea that design can change the world, but for better or for worse, and teaching students that design is not inherently neutral. So to begin, I discuss with students the power of design, who decides what gets designed, a history and critique of designers, and the structures and systems in which we work. And I use these texts to talk about how design activism has been defined, but the thing about it is that design activism is not so concretely defined, especially when you combine 2 words with so many meanings. And there are so many subsets of design, with just some examples listed here. And there are definitions of design activism that say that all of these kinds of design can be considered design activism, while others would say that design activism is distinct from them. So it's really about exploring and defining over time what it means for each of us and looking at the possibilities for what a designer is and can do. So here we did a group brainstorm into contemporary issues, starting with broad topics and going 2 levels deeper into specifics under each topic. And this was a way for them to see the variety of areas in which they can research and work based on their own interests. And in the first project that we did, students looked into one of these topics and began research to find examples of how design and designers have responded to the specific issue and make a case for it as design activism. So they first write a research paper about it and then deconstruct that paper in order to turn it into a zine. And we learned about the history of zines and their use as a medium for activism. So here are some examples. One student was looking at the farm workers movement and talked about the Fair Food Program as a model of design activism that came out of this movement. Another student talked about DACA and research designers who are dreamers and make work about DACA. And this student was looking at the issue of homelessness and focused on a service design project that provides showering facilities to homeless folks. And that first project and part of the class is about grounding students and exploring what design activism is and can be, looking at contemporary and historical examples and learning design research methods in order to contribute original writings and then visualize those writings with design. But most importantly, opening up the door for them to see the variety of ways, issues, and places that designers can work within. And for the second part of the class, if you remember that I mentioned way earlier that my peer and collaborator, Shadrick Addy, who now teaches at the Ohio State University, and we ran a workshop on core values in the beginning of grad school, and now we've updated the workshop for this class and to be in a digital format. And we also added on another activity that was not part of it originally, which we call the Design Activist Canvas. So to start, the Design Activist Manifesto is all about collaboration, understanding their collective values and ethical implications inherent within design projects. And we identified 4 domains in which we believe encompass all the areas designers work within and are responsible to, and students are split into groups that are each assigned 1 domain. And I'm just going to walk through the parts of the activity for 1 domain, but the activities were the same across all of them. So first, they discuss the role and responsibilities to the people and environments involved in their domain. Then they analyze the ethical implications of a certain project and brainstorm ways they could build upon or improve the design outcome. And then they brainstorm ideas outlining values, principles, and standards of practice specific to their group's domain. And finally, they turn these ideas into single statements. And once they had these, they read them to the class and then they collectively edit them in order to get approval from everyone. And this part takes the longest as students negotiate meanings, wordings, ideas, and concepts. But in the end, we have a manifesto that is approved and accepted by all students. The second activity in this workshop is about grounding students in their individual values and ethics as people and designers. And in this, we ask students to reflect on themselves in these categories of social identities, communities, influences, and inspirations, goals, and aspirations, and looking towards the future. And when they were coming up with these, it was sort of a private activity since a lot of this can be highly personal. But part of my goal here is to give students the time and space to reflect on these aspects of themselves that we aren't usually asked to spend time thinking about, especially in the classroom. And I think it's so important to actually reflect on these things in order to align ourselves with the kind of work that we do or don't want to do. They then were asked to make a piece based off of what they discovered about themselves using any medium. So these are some examples of the work students came up with. And this student used an architectural plan of a mosque to explore her American, Indian, and Kenyan cultures, which are all grounded in her religion. This student branded her own pizzeria and made a diagram of various factors that influence her, like family, friends, education, professional experience, and the degrees to which they influenced her over time from childhood to present. And the student knitted a basket with things that she had collected in her home as a sort of environmental portrait and a snapshot in time of quarantine. And in the last part of the class, once they have an idea of what design activism is, who they are, they're introduced to further research methods to learn about communities and people, emphasizing the idea that when they collaborate or enter a community, they're not the experts and they don't know what's best for any given community. And it's their responsibility to be designing with them and not for them. So I invited Sadie Redwing to come talk to my students, and she is an Indigenous scholar and designer whose work focuses on creating visual language for sovereign nations, and she was able to speak to what to consider when designing something that represents a community. Particularly important is the idea that designers have the power to show people a language and an identity, and yet a lot of the time we do a disservice to people by using stereotypes and inaccurate depictions like this, and as compared to using a group's actual history, voice, and symbols to represent them and design for them. So in my class, the students choose a subculture of a community to research, such as the origami community or Freegans, and learn as much as they can about them before they have to go out and find someone that is part of that subculture to interview and learn from. Overall, I'm really grateful to have been given this chance to build this class, and I'm looking forward to refining it and adding to it when I teach it again next semester. And so switching gears, I know that over the years, and especially in school, we get a lot of advice, and sometimes a 10-step plan or a list isn't actually helpful and just goes in one ear and out the other, and that we learn lessons through just going through the experience and not through hearing advice. But I wanted to end this by giving the one piece of advice that I find to be the most important, and that is to apply everywhere. And so whether that's an internship, scholarship, job, travel grant, conference, literally whatever it is, look for opportunities and apply to them. And I know a lot of time we're scared to do it because it's a lot of work and we don't think we're ready, or we don't think we're going to get it anyways. But if you haven't heard this before, there are actually a lot of times when everyone else thinks that way too, and then only like one person applies and then they are the one that ends up getting it. And also, like, the more you apply, the easier it gets every time and the more content you have to pull from. And if that's not convincing, because like I said, getting a list of advice doesn't actually exactly do much for us sometimes, I'm going to give some examples of opportunities and experiences I've had because I just applied. So I briefly talked about the research on the horticultural community that I did as an undergrad earlier, and I used that work to submit to the Design Educators Conference that was at the University of Michigan, and they had an equity scholarship that I applied to that gave me $1,000 to cover food, travel, and stay. So I got to present my work and attend my first conference for free. The next is that NC State had a really unique opportunity called DIVE, which is short for Diversity and Inclusion Adventure Experience, where we went on a 9-day camping and road trip to the coast of Louisiana, primarily to learn about coastal land laws, and the whole trip was free. All you had to do was apply. And we visited an island that is disappearing and home to Native American people who are considered some of the first climate change refugees in the world. And we got to sit down and talk to one of those people. And that video on the right is showing the one road that leads to the island where the water now reaches the road. We also kayaked out to places that used to be reachable by land, camped on the beach where you could see the lights of hundreds of oil rigs at night, went to the Hurricane Katrina Museum in New Orleans, and also generally learned outdoor skills. On our drive, we even got to stop at the Civil Rights Memorial Center and the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Alabama. And as if that wasn't cool enough, the College of Design at NC State had a travel grant aimed specifically at students wanting to have an experience outside of the classroom. So like a study abroad without the actual school involved. And I wanted to go to Portugal and learn more about the ties to Brazilian culture and history. And I was able to sort of set up my own curriculum. And I took a tour with Naki, who is a guy who runs an African Lisbon tour, where he shares the lost, covered, or silenced history of Portugal and the African continent. And on my own, I went to the Slave Market Museum that is housed within a building that was an actual slave market. And I took Portuguese lessons with a native speaker because I wanted to learn about the differences between Brazilian and European Portuguese. And this was actually my first time ever going outside of North and South America. And lastly, I mentioned the AIGA Design Conference that was last week, and I actually got free registration to go to the conference because I submitted my work and was accepted as a speaker during the Design Education Symposium. And originally, when it was in the spring, I was working with my school and department to try to get funding for travel, but because it went virtual, I didn't end up needing that. But I'm just trying to point out that you can and should go to conferences, and you can do it for free. All it takes is for you to apply and to also reach out to your department, because they will try to help you if they can, because after all, you are representing them. And I know that right now, a lot of these kinds of opportunities that I mentioned might not be happening due to COVID, but even regular scholarships without these experiences can help you pay for your classes and even buy materials like cameras, laptops, and equipment that's going to help your schooling and design practice. So also, if I'm being really, really real, the reason that I'm here talking to y'all today is because I applied for a position at Penn State that ended up getting canceled because of COVID, but that application led to this opportunity to be here with y'all today. And again, this is the only piece of advice I'd ever dared to give, because overall, if there's anything that I've learned through these experiences, it's that you have a unique viewpoint and skill set to contribute to the world and the people around you. And there are people who want to help support you and bring your voice into these spaces. And in turn, it's going to be a catalyst for your own growth and practice. So I'm gonna end it there, and I'll drop my email there in case anyone wants to reach out. And thank y'all so much for having me.
Hi, everyone. Can you all hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So I know everybody is actually muted in these lectures as a gift of the pandemic and the limitations of Zoom. So what I'm going to ask is that if there are any questions at all, I'd love for you, the students, faculty who are also joining us, to drop those questions in the chat. I'll be able to go through and facilitate some discussion with Victoria right now. So take a few minutes if you can, think of some of those really great questions and drop them in. Victoria, while that's happening, I wanted to sincerely say thank you for a wonderful presentation. It's incredible to see the work that you're doing, and certainly we are overjoyed to have you here speaking to our students and faculty, not only in graphic design, but many of us from outside graphic design in the Stuckeman School, in architecture, landscape architecture, in the graphic design minor, and elsewhere.
Thank you so much, y'all, for having me. It's definitely, we've been waiting for this day for a long time. It's been planned for a while, and I'm really grateful for this opportunity.
Excellent. Phil, did you have any additional thoughts why people are putting in some questions?
Sure. Actually, I have a question for my students. This semester, I have a joy of teaching my freshman students. I haven't taught the freshman students for a while, but this time coming back to my freshman students. So I really enjoy your presentation. And I have many students coming from the understanding of traditional graphic design, especially, are there any things that you want to share with my freshman students? Because they come to here to make beautiful poster design, logo design, many artifacts. But whatever you have to show us today is not maybe directly related to that. So do you have any advice for our freshman students? Because I asked them to come and I check attendance here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's some of the things that I touched on, right? Which is one, applying for things, because you never know what is going to come out of it and how that's going to influence the work that you make in the future. And the other is, related to like what I was talking about with my class, is taking the time to actually reflect on like who you are as a designer, what it is about design that you like, why do you want to be a designer, what kind of work do you want to make? And I think also even just thinking about like things outside of design, right? Like, what do you like? What like communities are you a part of? What do you like to watch? What are you drawn to? All those things, because those are the things that directly like funnel into the kind of work that you're going to make. And that's why I was trying to stress this point of like spending the time to actually reflect on those things, because then you'll have more of a path to understanding like the work that aligns with who you are, the things that you like and what you want to do, and the issues that you care about, right? So I think like when I was an undergrad, I was kind of like lost on that for a while, because you are sort of learning these more traditional aspects of design. And I like was trying to make this work that was about issues that I cared about, but I didn't really understand like what the connection was. And I think it takes a while to sort of get there, but yeah, I think that would be my advice for freshmen. And again, just to be open to any experiences that might or opportunities that might come your way.
Such a great answer. It's interesting. I heard Leif Steiner, who is a former alumni of ours, was an owner of Moxie Sozo in Denver, gave a speech. And the first quote he started off with was, there's, in terms of design work, there's food that feeds the body and food that feeds the soul, and make sure you put your best foot forward to kind of bridge that gap. So that's really incredible. I do have a question from Megan. She asked, what is the best experience you've had as a designer?
I guess I would say the best experience I've had is teaching, as teaching design, I guess. I just really, and for all you professors, I think you can relate to this as well, right? Like, just the joy of like being able to sort of like share the knowledge that you've gained over the years, and like see designers come into their own like practice and to come into their own like sense of design. And also, like hearing from students like, oh, you're the best TA that we've had, and like you're, like what you have done has affected us more than like you think that it has. And also, like, again, going back to the class that I'm teaching now, is like when students tell me like, oh, I can make work that is like connected to this thing that I really care about. Like I never even considered that. I had no idea, like no one ever told me that before. I think that is probably like the biggest satisfaction, I think. Is kind of just like opening up those doors and like minds and thoughts of students. So, and I guess just to like end that one out as well, is like what I was talking about, like what is the role of a designer, right? And like going past just the ability to like make visual and make graphics, like, teaching and being project managing and organizing and doing all these things are also aspects of design as well. And so like when I realized that I could also do these things and still be a designer, I think that falls under that as well.
Victoria, so if you did have the opportunity to teach at Penn State post-COVID, what would you want to teach here if the opportunity, we have the ability to present the opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely love to teach a version of this class I was talking about, right, that I'm working on right now. But I think I would definitely try to incorporate more like technical and, like parts of design, like VR, working with emerging technologies, and like coding and all these different aspects that go into making these kinds of experiences, because that's kind of hard online, and not having the equipment and not being having like that accessible for students. So if I were to have that opportunity and like be on campus with y'all and have access to those resources, I think it would be like a combination of like a integration of those two things.
That's awesome. So a great question from Gabby. Doing work that you're passionate about versus not is something I feel like designers always are faced with. Do you find that you do more commissions and jobs that are centered on things you personally are connected to, or do you have to take on more jobs that you're less passionate about?
Yes, thank you for that question. I think that's something that I talk about a lot with my students as well, is sort of like, the privilege of being able to take on these kinds of work. And I think something I was touching on as well is like this idea that like commercial work is like not for good, and then the work that is for good you have to do like outside of that time, right? Outside of like making money. And I don't think that that's true at all. So, I find that as I've like moved on and up in my like design career and profession, like I have had the privilege of having more opportunities to have those two things like be the same, right? But I know that as a young designer and like maybe as a freshman, like I definitely was taking on a lot of like work and commissions that were about things, it was like whatever someone asked me to do, I would do for them. So I think it does come with like time and experience that you kind of get to pick and choose more like what you want to do. But even now, like I do still sometimes have to take on commissions, right? That aren't like things that I'm directly passionate about, right? Like if I'm like making a website for like a family friend of their like selling like jewelry or something like that, like no, I'm not passionate about that. And sometimes that is just the reality of things. And like again, going back to like talking about this privilege of like, saying yes, everyone should make work that is for good, right? But also everyone needs to put food on the table and make money and all that stuff. But I also don't want to make make it seem like those are two separate things. And that's the reason that I talk about, being able to have space and time to reflect on who you are and the work that you do want to make, so that you can align it more and make money doing what you're actually, passionate about. So yes, that is the struggle and the balance.
That's the last question that we have. So I think, Victoria, thank you very much. I know Phil has some closing remarks, and then we'll be able to tell everybody about next steps.
Thank you. Oh, Phil, you're muted.
Victoria, thank you so much for sharing your experience. And also I really appreciate the fact that you mentioned apply, internship, and even grant or aid you can earn. One of the things that I have a difficult time is that we have so many scholarships. And I found that then my students don't have a time sometimes. And it's been really difficult. I want them to apply. I want them to ask. I'll do whatever I can to support. They submit their work or make a presentation any place. So thank you so much to bring that up. I hope that maybe next semester I'll get a lot of Phil, can you support me to go to there? Well, that's what I'm here for. I'm so here for supporting my students, my faculty. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Are there any other questions, my students? If not, maybe it's time to close our lecture today. But thanks again. And I'm sure when things are better or world is clear, then I'd like to have you come in person and interact with my students, interact with my faculty. Thanks again. Thanks everyone for coming to this wonderful presentation. And let's give her a hand, even if I don't see you guys. Again, happy Thanksgiving. Stay safe, okay? According to federal or government policy, stay at home. Don't go anywhere, I think this is very important. Safety, well-being is most important things. So thanks everyone. I look forward to seeing you after the break.
Thanks, y'all.